Yes, indeed, Buzzkillers. It is a piece of shit Saturday. We're talking about people who deserve more shame and opprobrium. But of course, as you know, we have an expert with us who's the exact opposite of a POS, and that is naturally Dr. Philip Nash from Penn State University. How are you, Professor?
I'm doing great, and for some reason, really keen on doing pieces of shit. So
Yeah.
I don't know what that tells you about me, but anyway, it is one of my favorite things to do.
These are proving to be among our most popular episode types, and whenever I talk to historians and I say, hey, will you do a POS Saturday for us? They always smile and laugh. For some of them, it's not very on brand, so we sort
And they say, let Nash do it.
Well, we're doing a Nazi again, and it just shows how unbelievably deep this bench is.
This is a deep bench, absolutely.
So who is this POS?
This is Julius Streicher, Streicher. Streicher.
And who was he?
Who is he?
What did he do?
So, I mean, the best brief description of Streicher was provided by the prosecution at the Nuremberg trial, 1945-46. They refer to him as, quote, Nazi Germany's Jew baiter number one. Which in Nazi Germany, that's saying a lot.
Yeah. You climbed to the top of that heap of shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Julius Streicher, born in Bavaria, 1885. He was an elementary school teacher, believe it or not.
Yikes.
And apparently, I want to say, parenthetically, that he lost his job in 1928, partly because this is 1928. This is well before the Nazis come to power.
Yeah.
He insisted all the students sort of greet him with Heil Hitler.
Oh, my
which
God.
Which is a little bit of, politicization of the classroom.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, elementary schools teacher. Distinguished World War I service, earned the Iron Cross. In 1919, for reasons I was unable to determine, but in 1919, he apparently became an obsessive anti-Semite, and it directed the rest of his public life thereafter. He joined the extreme right-wing German Socialist Party. So this is, despite its name, one of these many sort of splinter right-wing groups active in post-World War I Germany. It was, in its terms of its program, it was a lot like the Nazi Party. But even at this early stage, his anti-Semitism was too extreme for many on the German right. Despite that, he built a fairly serious following, thousands of followers. In 1921, he bolted from the German Socialist Party and brought enough of his followers into Hitler's Nazi Party to double its size.
Double it?
Yes. So this is extremely important in the early history of the Nazi Party. Because the Nazi Party was nothing and then becomes something. Julius Streicher actually played a pretty important role. So he joins the Nazi Party super early. He's what they called an alter Kämpfer.
Okay.
Right? He's one of the original, and we talked about this in other shows. If you join the Nazi Party before 1933, certainly if you were there for the beer hall putsch, you had enormous credibility in the party.
And by the way, this is 21. So it just
21,
shows that
super.
things have been going on
21.
for a
I mean,
long
that's
time.
essentially what, like the Nazi Party's maybe a year old.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So,
but even still, it just shows that it didn't just come into being immediately.
Absolutely not. No, it remained a small splinter party for a long, long time. For his role, he was actually one of the few people thanked by name by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf.
Wow.
Adolf Hitler doesn't talk a lot about other people by name.
Ever.
Well, yeah. So he was a fairly major leader early in the party's history. Played a leading role in the beer hall putsch, right? When the shooting started, he was in the front rank with Adolf Hitler. And for these sorts of reasons, he quickly earned Hitler's lasting loyalty and protection.
Wow. So what else did he do then?
In the Nazi Party structure, in the mid to late 1920s, he was named Gauleiter of Franconia, or Franken, as the Germans call it. So this is in northern Bavaria. The capital of Franconia is Nuremberg.
Right. Which we talk about a lot.
Which we talk about a lot. The Nazis, because the Nazis were Nazis, their geographical structure, they broke Germany up not into provinces, but what we call Gaue, Gau, G-A-U. Those are basically Nazi provinces.
Okay.
And that's when the Nazis come to power, that's going to supersede the existing sort of federal system for most purposes that Germany was broken up into. And so a Gauleiter was a Gau leader, so the chief, the chief Nazi in charge of a particular province, and its geographic borders changed a little bit, but we'll keep it simple and just call it Franconia. So it's essentially a Nazi governor, and had a great deal of power in their Gau. And so that was his role. After 1933, he was in charge of Franconia. Very powerful guy. He made a lot of anti-Semitic speeches. He's the public face of anti-Semitism. So far earlier, back in 1923, he had also launched Der Stürmer, which it doesn't translate perfectly. It literally means the stormer, But
Yeah.
in Nazi speak, Sturm, or like the Sturmabteilung, right, the storm department, it's like to storm a trench, right, or to attack.
Oh, okay.
So you could also translate this as the attacker, I guess, or the stormtrooper, right?
Yeah.
Same sort of idea. The official slogan of this tabloid was "The Jews are our misfortune."
But this is a major publication. This isn't some minor thing.
No. It's
tell us
huge.
more about
so
that.
it's basically a sensationalist anti-Semitic rag based on lies, stereotypes, and distortions. It included things like, so they would like send a reporter to the courtroom when a Jewish German person was accused of a crime.
Yeah.
And then they would write up a sort of "you are there" type story and look at how evil this person
Oh,
is.
Lordy.
Right? And of course, the implication being that he's evil because he's Jewish. So eyewitness courtroom accounts of Jews accused of crimes, lurid stories of blood libel.
Yep. Right.
Which is normally something you saw in anti-Semitism in centuries earlier, right? The idea that you had a ritual murder of a Christian child, typically. If a Christian child disappeared, you would blame it on the Jews.
Yeah.
He's one of the few people who's carrying this practice of these stories into the 20th century. Also, very popular in Der Stürmer were endless semi-pornographic stories of Jewish men seducing Aryan, quote-unquote, Aryan German or sort of Christian German girls.
Right.
Readers were encouraged to collect and send in stories of evil Jews, and then they would publish them with the readers, only using the readers' initials.
Yeah.
So there was complete impunity. You could make up all sorts of anti-Semitic slurs and get published in the newspaper. So in other words, there was a premium put on spreading anti-Semitic lies. If you were a German Gentile and you were declared, quote unquote, too friendly toward Jews, they would print your name and address.
Oh, my God.
So it was essentially early doxing in the anti-Semitic Nazi context. Individual Jews were attacked by name. The Nuremberg prosecutors, they actually counted. They went through the issues of Der Stürmer, and they counted at least 50 different suggestions that the Jews need to be eliminated.
50?
Right. So it's some version of eliminated. Either murdered, gotten rid of, made to disappear, etc. So 50.
Oh, God.
They were very interested in that because of they're going to, as we'll see, they're going to charge you with incitement.
Yeah.
Basically, there was no claim that was considered too outrageous for this newspaper. You talked in an earlier show about the Hindenburg disaster, 1937.
Yeah.
He actually gave a speech in which he implied that the Jews were behind that.
Oh, so the Jews invented static electricity or something, whatever
exactly.
it was.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
He also claimed in a speech that if a quote-unquote Aryan woman had sex with a Jewish man once, she would never again be able to produce a quote-unquote pure-blooded Aryan kid.
This just reminds me so much. Every time we study the Nazis, and every time you get more in depth about the Nazis, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
No bottom.
It is incredible.
There really isn't. There is no bottom. And now, obviously, this is the bottom of the bottom, but still, he was, as we'll see, well, anyway, we'll get into it.
How popular was it?
Which is important, too. You can go ahead and, we see this in our world all the time. Just because you have a website doesn't mean anyone reads it.
Yeah. Yeah, future historians will have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, good luck with that. Around 1935, Der Stürmer enjoyed a peak circulation of 600,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
So remember, this is before the Anschluss with Austria, so Germany's population is about 65 million. There were a lot of pass-along readers.
In other words, explain what that is.
Basically, I buy a copy, I read it, and I hand it to my friend. And then he reads it. He's not counted in the official circulation numbers, but he's a reader.
This is very common among newspaper readers.
Especially in this period. I looked into, because I wrote about Claire Booth Luce, I looked into things like Life magazine.
Yeah.
And their pass-along readership was enormous.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
With pass-along readers, the readership was estimated at its peak between 2 and 3 million readers.
That's amazing.
That's a lot.
By the way, that's not including all the kids or old people who were... That shows that the middle age group of Germans were really taken by.
So that is it. I'll put it this way: that's a big circulation and a big readership for any publication.
Right? Yeah.
Even daily newspapers. It was also displayed. The Germans did this with other publications too, and I think you see this around the world at the time. You would have big glass display cases where they'd lay out the entire issue of the magazine or newspaper. So at a bus stop, for example, you could stand and read it for free.
Wow.
They did that a lot too.
So that doesn't count.
And you can go online and you can see photographs of like people standing around reading issues of Der Stürmer in these glass cases. They exist.
Lordy.
So some scholars believe that Der Stürmer played an important role in conditioning Germans for genocide. And it's very hard to establish causation in individual cases, but certainly highly plausible. It's part of a cultural environment in which anti-Semitism becomes normalized. There's no question about that.
Yeah, if it's at a bus stop.
Yeah.
And laid out in glass. And
Right.
You
It's
can
not
it's
like
normalized.
where it's sort of scurrilous or passed around in a plain brown wrapper and you don't want to admit you're reading it. Not at all. So Streicher also established what was called the Stürmer Verlag, or the Stürmer Publishing House.
Mhm.
He published tons of anti-Semitic works, pamphlets and books, including children's books.
Ugh.
And in my Holocaust class, I talk a lot about this one particularly notorious case. It's a book called Der Giftpilz, which means the poisonous mushroom.
Oh.
And that was its basic metaphor, is that Jews are poisonous mushrooms, and you have to sort the good humans from the bad ones. And this mushroom may look tasty, but it's really poisonous.
And the spores are going to spread.
And by the way, you can go. There's a Calvin College, calvin.edu, has what's called the German Propaganda Archive. And you can go and look at this.
That's interesting.
And it's important, too, because, as you might imagine, if you go online looking for Nazi sources,
Yeah, you have to be careful.
you might end up someplace you don't want to be.
Right.
But in an academic setting, you can read this in translation and see the illustrations, and it's far more appalling than I'm presenting it here.
Okay, Buzzkills, we will try to put the link for this on the blog post for this episode.
That would be a good thing.
And
it's very well done. You look at the illustration, and then it's got the translation of the text right next to it, so you can just toggle back and forth.
And so you, by doing that, you were looking at a calvincollege.edu website, not the latest Nazi group.
Yeah,
okay.
not Stormfront or whatever.
Right. Okay.
So I mentioned this partly because at the very end, the last page of this children's book, which apparently was used in some schools circa 1938 when it came out, the last illustration has all these sort of stormtroopers standing around looking at a poster of Julius Streicher. So he's always very careful to promote himself in these works as well. Partly because he was editor and publisher of Der Stürmer and head of the Stürmer Verlag, he became a very wealthy man. This was, among other things, lucrative.
Yes, and as we know nowadays, hate sells.
Hate sells really well. It absolutely does, especially when the tone has been set and you've incentivized to embrace these ideas, for sure. So some extreme top Nazis hated him. So this is another part of the popularity question. Hated him and hated Der Stürmer. So, for example, Hermann Goering actually forbade his staff from reading Der Stürmer.
Wow.
Which is interesting, because Hermann Goering himself was an anti-Semite. So then you wonder if this is more about his personal animus towards Streicher, which was quite strong.
Well, yeah.
There were times when Hitler criticized Streicher, because there were times, for example, I want to say at the time of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, where Hitler was actually trying to dial back the public anti-Semitism for the purposes of promoting Nazi propriety around the world, right? Make us look good. So we sort of tamped down, and then Streicher wouldn't necessarily play ball with that. So there were times when Hitler criticized Streicher for tactical reasons, but then would always defend him. Mm-hmm. Hitler, by all accounts, was a devoted reader of Der Stürmer, and even called Streicher's portrayal of the Jews too moderate.
Oh my!
Now remember everything I just told you 5-10 minutes ago, and Hitler looks at that. This is too moderate. So here's a quote. This is from Hitler's table talk, where the note takers at Hitler's headquarters during the war always wrote down what Hitler said.
Yeah.
So this is like probably 1941, 42. And I'm quoting out of Hitler. The truth is the opposite of what people say. Streicher, idealized the Jew. The Jew is baser, fiercer, more diabolical than Streicher depicted him. End quote.
That's amazing, because I would have thought Streicher was, as we say, the most extreme.
Absolutely. And I would just, if I can just hang on this broader point here, because you see this in other contexts. In the history of dictators, sometimes you have dictators. I'm thinking of, for example, someone like Ho Chi Minh, who obviously is an extreme communist by most definitions. In the context of his leadership circles, he's actually relatively moderate and sometimes has to do things to rein in the more extremist underlings around him. Not the case with Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler himself he's not being pushed by more extremist elements under him. He is the extremist element. For the reason you just said, right? If you look at Der Stürmer and say, this doesn't go far enough. No one is to your right on this issue.
Lordy.
Like no one. If I can just
Lordy.
insert that little comment on Adolf Hitler and sort of contextualize him. So one final thing he did as Gauleiter of Franconia in 1938, a few months before the actual Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass.
Right.
Listeners probably know about it. Probably should do our own post on our own show on that. This is November 1938, when they rounded up thousands of people in the concentration camps for the first time, Jews, that is. Concentration camps already existed, where they destroyed all sorts of Jewish shops, set fire to a whole bunch of synagogues, killed hundreds of people, et cetera, et cetera. A real important development in the Holocaust. Months in advance of that, he ordered the destruction of the synagogue in Nuremberg.
Yeah.
big, beautiful building. You go online, see pictures of it. They took pictures of it before it was destroyed. And he justified this act on the account of its architecture. And he said, and I'm quoting, this synagogue, quote, disfigured the beautiful German townscape.
Yeah,
so they bulldozed the synagogue.
We should remind Buzzkillers, we often forget and we often fall into the trap, not necessarily we here in the Institute, everyone culturally falls in the trap of saying Jews versus Germans. The Jews in Germany were German.
Yes, thank you.
So the synagogue is a German synagogue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a place where Germans go to worship.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
that they're Jewish is a secondary consideration, but they make it the primary one.
Yeah. Well, and also my point here is that, when most of the synagogues were destroyed in Kristallnacht, it was part of this mass event, right? It was sort of organized and called for. He's out in front of it. Right, he's involved in destroying synagogues before the other people.
Yeah, because this is, as you say, months ahead of time. So, did his power continue to grow throughout the war?
No,
or as the war breaks out, and then
1939. No, actually didn't. And and here's, I mean, he's such a POS. He in some ways can't help himself because I've not even gotten into some of his other acts. So by 1939, 1940, he's notorious among Nazis for his corrupt and embarrassing behavior. He was not only rich because of his publications, he was also rich because he was keeping confiscated Jewish property, which you basically seize property, pay the Jewish owners, maybe pennies on a dollar, and then you could turn around and sell it and make enormous bank. He did that all the time.
Check out that modern slang, which make enormous bank.
Sorry.
Professor Nash is with it with the kids.
He's like, Nash keeping it real.
Yeah.
He would very carelessly fling all sorts of outrageous accusations against other top Nazis, including he constantly getting into public spats with other Gauleiter. He got it. If you're wondering why Hermann Goering hates him, and this may have been key in his downfall, he accused Goering of being impotent and says that Goering only had a kid because of artificial insemination, which are not
bizarre. No,
and not against someone that powerful.
No.
Like, are you high? Like, what are you doing? He also committed adultery publicly, but he was well known for having extramarital affairs. And in at least one incident, he was seen, I think William Shirer actually witnessed this, that he would stroll through Nuremberg, right, his capital city, cracking a bullwhip at passersby.
That's astounding.
So a lot of his behavior is just flat out unhinged. And then attached to the anti-Semitism. So he was finally within the bureaucracy of the Nazi Party. He was investigated and stripped of his party offices in 1940.
Amazing.
And basically forced out of the public eye. He still, and because Hitler still liked him, he technically kept his title of Gauleiter, even though he wasn't actually in the office. And he continued to publish Der Stürmer. So he was out of the public eye because he essentially had become an embarrassment, but he didn't suffer any more punishment than that until the end of the war.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the end of the war. What happens to him?
Yeah,
What's his fate then?
He's captured pretty easily by the advancing American armed forces in 1945. He is a defendant in the Nuremberg trial. See Nuremberg trial show if you'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah.
He was essentially tried under count 4, crimes against humanity, as an accessory to murder for incitement. And their argument was that he maintained his anti-Semitic, you might say, eliminationist propaganda even after he knew the Holocaust was underway.
Right. Okay.
And that's something the prosecutors hang their hat on, right? He's not just sort of spreading lies and sort of scurrilous accusations. He knows that it could have an effect in terms of actual murder. So they played that up. He was shunned by the other defendants during the trial that lasted better part of a year. Was prone to anti-Semitic outbursts from the dock. And by the way, and apparently we know a lot about the defendants. We actually didn't talk about this in the Nuremberg trial episode. We know a lot about the defendants because American doctors were constantly interrogating.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right.
Interrogating the defendants and learning a lot about them and becoming comfortable with them and talking with them a lot. And during these discussions, Streicher claimed that all the judges were Jews, which they weren't.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think any of them were. So he was sentenced to death, long story short, and hanged in a botched hanging.
Yeah, which you mentioned on the second part 2 of the Nuremberg show. Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty clear from the eyewitness accounts vary a little bit, but it's pretty clear that he did not have his neck broken by the fall when the gallows trapdoor opened, and rather he strangled to death. So if you think he deserved a painful death, you got your wish.
Yeah, it's hard to feel outraged that his hanging was
true.
botched.
Yes, absolutely. But here's the ironic thing, and I think I mentioned this in the Nuremberg show, he may not have deserved the death penalty
Uh-huh.
because, yeah, did he incite genocide? It's impossible to establish a direct link between a particular act of incitement and a particular act of killing or a particular war crime or crime against humanity.
Because this is a very important legal point.
Absolutely. So, in other words, it's more in the realm of inference, or he helps create this sort of murderous atmosphere, but that doesn't necessarily make him an accessory to murder. And I'm talking purely in legal terms. I'm not talking in moral terms. I'm not defending this guy at all. He belongs on this show in this context very clearly. But in terms of who got a death sentence, who didn't, why one person got this sentence and one person got the other, I think you can make a case that this was going a little too far, that maybe he should have gotten a prison sentence. I mean, if you look at someone like, I don't know, Albert Speer, who's knee-deep in the exploitation of slave labor, and then gets 20 years. I mean, that doesn't seem particularly fair. It seems possible that he was executed simply because he was an extraordinarily vile human being, which, be there no doubt about this, he was an extraordinarily vile human being, and I could make a case that he should have been our very first episode of POS.
That doesn't
because that's what he was.
By the way, was there any notion or any thought during the Nuremberg trials that maybe we shouldn't sentence these people to death, keep them alive, and use them as examples?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, my sense is that, like a lot of people, there was a consensus that the most serious penalty is death.
Right.
And for the most serious crimes, you give them death. And that's how you send a message. If you keep them alive, that you're saying, even if it's a life sentence, you're saying this guy's not quite as bad as the guy we executed.
Oh, okay. And in theory, there could be people who are championing him out there.
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay. I understand that. Well, Professor, you've enlightened us once again about some really, truly vile person who deserves more shame and opprobrium.
I will not say it was a pleasure, but it was important.
Yeah. Well, Buzzkillers, now you know that a lot of them deserve the title POS and a lot more than that. We will talk to all of you next week.